again and welcome to another one of my videos, and this one is the first video for a brand new topic. So now that we've studied Germany between 1890 to 1945, we go back and look at 1918 to 1945 in more detail from an international perspective. So 1918 to 1945 is known as the interwar years. In other words, they're the years between World War I and World War II. And it's basically looking at, did they establish a proper lasting peace after World War I? Well, no they didn't, because 20 years later there was another world war. And it's looking at, well, what happened at the end of World War I that meant there was still unresolved business between Germany and the Allied powers that then resulted in World War II. I'm really hoping, guys, that you're going to enjoy this module. It's my favourite topic. I enjoy teaching this topic because I find it so interesting how the British, French and American governments really got things wrong in the 1920s and the 1930s, and that resulted in the rise of Hitler and the outbreak of World War II. So we're going to start off by looking at 1918 and the peace agreement. So November 1918, Germany signs the armistice, and that ends World War I. It's a new German government, don't forget, the Weimar government, and they are basically forced into signing a peace deal. What follows is a long process of peace talks in what's known as the Paris Peace Conference, because it took place in Paris, specifically the Palace of Versailles, okay? And it's looking at three countries in particular and what they wanted to achieve after World War I. And they're known as the Big Three, okay? And that is France, whose president is George Clemenceau, Britain, whose Prime Minister is David Lloyd George, and the USA, whose president is Woodrow Wilson. It's important not to forget Italy in all of this, because Italy was on the side of the victors as well. It switched sides and joined with the Allies, which meant that Italy had a few demands as well. And it later becomes important when we look at what happens when Mussolini comes to power in Italy. But for now, we are going to focus in on the Big Three and what each member of the Big Three wanted out of the peace talks. So most importantly, we look at France. Why is France most important? Because World War I was fought on French soil. It was also fought on Belgian soil as well, in Belgium, neighbouring France, but Belgium is a small country, so didn't play a huge part in the peace talks. France and George Clemenceau, their president, wanted revenge, okay, because their farmland in northern France had been torn apart due to the trenches of World War I, and they had suffered the most number of casualties from World War I, mounting to 1.6 to 1.7 million deaths, okay, including civilians being non-military personnel. This meant that the French were out for blood. They wanted to see Germany pay for the damage that they had done. And if you think back to the causes of World War I, which I know you've not studied for a very long time, probably year 8, Germany actually invaded France during the time of the Franz Ferdinand assassination and all that going on, but they invaded France because they'd assumed that France would defend their ally Russia. So they kind of premeditated that France would invade them, and so invaded France first. And that gave France, after the war, all the excuse they need to say, you caused it. You invaded us, you caused this war, and you lost, so you're going to pay. So it's really important when you look at what the big three wanted. France wanted revenge, and they wanted that mainly through money. They wanted financial compensation for all the damages that had been done, okay? But they also wanted Germany to lose land, because a big country, a big powerful central country that Germany had become, that would provide a threat later. So by reducing the size of Germany, that meant that Germany didn't have as many resources, didn't have as large a population, and therefore that meant that it was more difficult for the Germans to go about rearming their army and recovering to becoming the superpower that they had been before World War One. Now let's look at Britain. Now Britain had suffered during World War One, okay, between 800,000 to 1 million fatalities or deaths. So not as many people died, not as many British soldiers died rather than French soldiers, but still a huge number of fatalities. So Lloyd George, the Prime Minister, promised the German people, the British people, if you re-elect me at the next election, I will make Germany pay. I will support France, and I will make sure that under these peace agreements, Germany pays for what they'd done during World War One. However, Lloyd George wasn't as vengeful as Clemenceau. He wanted Germany to be reduced in size and to pay some reparations, but he didn't want to see Germany completely crippled. Why? Because Germany was in the centre of Europe, and Lloyd George believed that Central Europe needed to have a strong economy, otherwise the rest of Europe would suffer. He also feared the Russians more than he feared the Germans, because Russia in 1917 had to pull out of a war because they'd undergone a revolution. And that revolution had been communist. And the British feared communism and the spread of communism from Russia into Europe. And they believed that if Germany wasn't strong enough, their economy wasn't strong enough, then they would fall to communism as well. So Lloyd George, he wanted Germany to pay, but he knew that it couldn't be extortionate. Otherwise, there could be political consequences and economic consequences for the rest of Europe. However, selfishly, Britain also wanted to keep its kind of imperial and naval supremacy. In other words, it wanted to continue having the largest empire and the largest navy. And so they really supported Germany losing all its colonies. And that meant that Britain could continue to have the largest empire and still be the most powerful nation in Europe at the time. Now, America was slightly different. America did not join the war until 1917. And they did so to sort of tip the balance into France and Britain's favour. And as a result of that, the American people, just wanted to go back to a policy whereby America was no longer involved in European politics. They weren't particularly vengeful in the way that Britain and France, the people wanted revenge there. So when it comes to America, they definitely believed more in giving Germany a fighting chance of succeeding after World War One. On top of that, America at this point had a pretty unique president, Woodrow Wilson. And he's unique in the sense that he was a real idealist. What I mean by idealist is that he had a vision, an idea of what he wanted global politics and society to look like. And he was a real peacemaker. So he believed that instead of having this alliance system where you've got a big block of allies, Britain, France, Russia, the Triple Entente on one side, and another big alliance, a central alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire on another, two great big power blocks fighting against each other, what he wanted instead was a council where countries could come together, air their grievances and find diplomatic, peaceful ways of resolving those conflicts. And that ideal was what he tried to push through in the peace agreements. Okay, and what he came up with was what was called the League of Nations. And you may not have heard of the League of Nations now, but by your exam, trust me, you are going to know an awful lot about the League of Nations because we have to study it in quite a bit of detail. But it's really important at this stage for you to know that Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States, came up with this League of Nations where countries could come together and talk through their problems. Now this sounds perfect, this sounds idyllic. You think, well, brilliant, okay, this is what needed to happen in Europe after World War One. And it's great that America are getting involved. However, don't forget, France, huge amount of prejudice and fear towards Germany. So they were not willing to get involved in talking with Germany through their problems. Britain had a bit of a chip on its shoulder, thought it was better than everyone else, you know, best empire, etc. Plus America, whilst Woodrow Wilson was this idealist, this visionary, the rest of America just wanted to keep out of European business. And they developed what becomes known as an isolationist policy. Isolation. I will talk a lot over the next 6 months about America being in ice. Okay, America chooses to spend a good chunk of the 1920s and the 1930s sat in ice. Okay, so that is America's stance. And unfortunately, without America there as a kind of an arbiter, as a peacemaker, it became too squabbly, too argumentative between the European countries. So there were some real flaws to the plan. Right, now I'm going to briefly talk you through the developmental task. I've managed to speak to a few of you over the past week about the developmental task. It'd be really, really good if more of you did it. And I know there's lots of other subjects and everything. Even if you don't complete it, even if you just take a look at it for 5 minutes and write down some ideas, it will really benefit you. So it's a source task. On this paper, we go back to looking at primary sources. So you will be given something that's either a speech or a political cartoon, an image, or a newspaper article or snippet from a newspaper article, and you'll be asked how useful it is. And you need to answer it in a similar way to how you answer the 8-mark useful questions for the medicine paper. The only difference is that for the interwar paper, you get 2 sources, usually one written source, like a political speech, and 1 visual source. And the visual sources are always, if not nearly always, political cartoons. So we're going to be studying political cartoons an awful lot over the next 6 months. So the first one I'm showing you is a cover of a French magazine which shows a political cartoon. And it was published in February 1919, so quite early into the peace talks, only 4 months, November, December, January, February, yes, 4 months, I can count, since the armistice. And it shows a tiger kind of with his paw catching an eagle. Now, you'll get used to this. Different animals represent different things. So if you ever see a dove, for example, a dove means peace. If you ever see, I'm trying to think of some other ones now off the top of my head, a lion can often represent the British Empire. So with this one, the tiger represents Clemenceau. His nickname was the Tiger because he was so aggressive, you know, in his views, and certainly towards Germany after World War One. The eagle, you will see in Nazi propaganda as well, if you remember from what we've done recently, is a symbol of Germany. So you've got here a tiger representing France, you know, overpowering an eagle representing Germany. And it's basically saying, well, how useful is this? Don't overthink it, okay? It's useful because it shows quite clearly France's intentions to enact revenge upon Germany. And you just need to link that to the contextual knowledge that's in your knowledge organiser, my brand new knowledge organisers that I spent a long time making for you guys, and is also the things I've just discussed in this video. So you can talk about revenge and why he wanted revenge and the type of revenge that he was going to enact on Germany, okay? Also within this type of source, you need to talk about provenance. Now, provenance, it's been a while since we've studied it, is the nature, origin and purpose of a source, why it was made, okay? And you need to think about, well, it's a French magazine cover. So think about how it's portraying the French Prime Minister, the French President, and how it's portraying the German eagle or the German people, the German nation at this point. And remember that magazines and cartoons of this kind always show the general view of the public, okay? Doesn't do, you know, something that doesn't go with the sway of what the public are thinking. So in this case, think about how the tiger looks compared to the eagle and what that suggests about the power play, the position that France is in after World War One compared to Germany's position. And always be thinking about how the French public and their leader Clemenceau wanted revenge. And that really does explain what this front cover picture is about. Have a go, submit on Teams, and let me know if you want particular feedback on it as well. And I will hopefully see some of you in school over the next couple of days. But if not, I will see you next week via YouTube when I post my next video.